Hey HCDA, and welcome back to Captain of Industry. There was a little bit of a delay there because of my holiday that was actually slightly extended as well, but we are back. And today going to do something that is either very smart or very stupid, but either way, you guys have yourself to blame for it. And that's not a complaint at all, by the way. Several of you have noted in the comments that I have not been using the balancers at all. So these are basically things that you can use to split, not just split inputs and outputs, but also prioritize which lane they go on. And that could be very useful. For example, the most obvious example is over here. I am using the wood for my construction parts, but I'm also using wood for making coal as well as wood chips. And you probably want to use them first for the construction parts and then for other matters, but right now the way this is working is just being equally split between everything. Now, that actually got me thinking that I kind of need to redesign my factory anyway, and I've been kind of just building everything pretty close together. Well, I thought I wasn't, but as you can see, everything kind of grew together anyway. And the reason for that is that we keep getting new recipes that are more and more efficient and use different inputs and outputs, but we also kind of sometimes want to use the old inputs and outputs as well. And all of that means that I kind of need to redesign some of this, and it is really hard to do if everything is so close together. So that means I kind of just want to start over, not start over the entire game, by the way, but to kind of make a new design. And I was thinking we have this open area over here, which is nice and tidy. So we can probably use that to set up a new factory and then break down the old one, and then we can reutilize this space later on. Now, what I'm not entirely sure about is how I want to do that, and I have already been staring at my screen for probably over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, to kind of figure out what would be the best way to do this, because there is a significant chance that what I do, speaking from experience here, just ends up being an alternate version of what I already have, which is a lot of work and doesn't really achieve anything. So whatever I end up doing needs to be put some thought into, because otherwise, well, like I said, I'm just going to end up with pretty much the same as I had, probably something that's potentially even worse than what I've had. So that is not something we want. So long story short, the result of my hour of thinking was, there's several things actually. So first of all, one of the problems that I have is this simple iron facility over here. Now we're actually slowly going to be replacing that with steel production. Not entirely though, but we are going to be replacing some of that. And this iron production over here, there's no way I can expand that because it's completely in the middle of everything else. So I do need to keep in mind that whatever I make from raw products, I need to be able to expand later on. Sort of similar here for the copper production we have, although in theory we have a little bit of room here to expand, but either way that's not really going to work. And another thing I've noticed is that a lot of there's actually not that much, how do you say that, kind of end products. We basically need construction parts and science, and I believe that is pretty much it. I might be forgetting some, well, food of course, but that's kind of a separate production chain entirely. So that's pretty much all we need. That also means that, for example, what you can see happening over here, I'm producing some science here, and we're going to need to produce a new type of science pretty soon. And all we need to do is add a few more recipes to that, or a few more resources, I should say, to that. But that's really annoying to do if you want to kind of automate that. So I am thinking that these assemblers should maybe be in a separate area. And then the raw products that we're making should be kind of in their own little districts, so that we can still transport them to each other where we need to, but we also have room to expand those districts as we go. On top of that, I'm still not done yet, we also unlocked the recycling somewhere here, which actually means that we can slowly start making, we can start recycling stuff. That means that I could build a waste sorting plant, and this waste sorting plant actually makes those iron and copper scraps that I got way in the beginning. So if I now go to my iron production, for example, I can actually make iron from scraps or make it from iron ore. Now, it's obviously better to do that from iron scraps because that is stuff that I already use somewhere else. It's literally free stuff. But on top of that, it actually produces less pollution as well, and it also doesn't produce the side product. Now, the side product is not really a problem in my opinion because I'm actually using that elsewhere. But either way, less pollution is always a good thing. But that also means I need to set up my iron production in such a way that I can actually utilize this scrap. So that means I have a lot of work to do in this episode. I'm not entirely sure it will even fit in just a single episode, but let's just get started. And since a lot of you seem to like this, I'm going to go and run you through my thought process, and feel free to leave the comments where you can tell me where I'm completely doing this wrong, because like I said, there's a good chance I'm going to do something wrong along the way. But anyway, we're going to start off with some iron production. And in order to do that, we can use either iron scraps or the iron ore, like I just said. And we want to make sure this prioritizes the iron scraps, which it does, with the recipe set this way. And that means that I am going to need inputs for 3 different items. I need iron scraps, coal, and iron ore. Now, did I set this up correctly? Yes, I did. Now, what I'm actually going to do, let's start with some storage. I'm actually going to start at the lowest level first and then just upgrade everything as we go along, because that's probably going to be a bit more efficient than doing it any other way. I am going to make sure we have this row, like this row of blocks here. This is going to be our highway. I want to make sure this is completely clear of traffic of any shape or form, so the trucks can still get around. I'm going to set up the storage here as well. I'm going to leave myself quite a bit of space in between the storage units and the manufacturing units, mostly so we can fit in things like lifts, belts, pipes, whatever we need, we can fit it in over here as well. Now, I have this larger square here that you can see. What I actually want to do is make sure that we also leave the, I'm not entirely sure about this yet, but maybe leave the outer part of that square empty as well. So if we use multiple squares, we still have a way to actually go in between those squares as well. So that means that I'm starting to build basically from over here, and since I already decided that I'm going to leave this empty and this is the mining area, I don't have to do that on this side of the square. So I am going to need 3 types of storage. Okay, so no rocket science here just yet, but we are setting up 3 different inputs like I just said, and then we have the scraps coming in over here. And then over here, it's a little hard to see because this tree is in the way. Over here I have a balancer. And I want to prioritize this input because this is where the scraps are coming from. And then we can actually put the scraps and the iron ore on the same input belt over here. So these things will take in both the iron scraps and the iron ore and just start using whatever they have available. But on the belt should be iron scraps whenever we have them, and if we don't, it's going to fall back on producing the molten iron by means of the iron ore. Now then, another thing that someone pointed out in the comments that I actually had no idea, and that was a game changer for me, is that you can actually right click certain things and then you get automatically teleported to the recipe menu where you can see everything you can right now produce and that you can produce in the future, which could be very helpful if I had any idea when I was going to unlock this, etc. But at least it's super helpful right now because I can actually see what I can produce and what that's actually going to lead into. So for example, of course, we know molten iron is going to turn into iron, but well, we can right click and see what we're actually going to be using that iron on as well. Now, obviously, we're going to make the construction parts like we are now. Initially, we were making the iron into mechanical parts as well, but I don't think we're necessarily going to do that because we can also just make that from steel completely now. And this is what I was talking about. You kind of want to redesign our the way we are making stuff if we get new recipes, and this is one of the key examples, I think, of exactly that. So that means that we actually need less iron than we were making before, at least comparatively. We might still need this amount of iron, but we don't need to scale everything up at the same time because we're replacing some of the iron production with steel production. But steel production also relies on the same molten iron, it just needs different in and output. So we need to make sure that we can repurpose, for example, the blast furnaces that we were using before, at least if I had done this from the beginning, that we can repurpose this and then start making some steel instead, at least with a part of our molten iron. So what I'm going to do is I am going to set up both a facility to make iron as well as a facility to make steel, but make sure that those are in different areas so I can easily scale up one or the other. So looking at the recipes that actually use iron, I just came to the conclusion that now we're no longer making iron into mechanical parts because we're going to do that from steel, that being more efficient. We actually don't need that much iron anymore because we only need iron for the construction parts, which is a fairly efficient recipe. We need iron for the vehicle parts, but honestly we barely need them. Of course we do need some of them, but we don't need a huge production of that, and that's pretty much it. So we only need iron in order to make construction parts 1. Now, I'm not entirely sure how much I want of this, probably more than we currently have, but I'm thinking something like 24 per minute should be fine. So that means that we are going to need a total of 18 iron per minute as well. We can always scale it up later, thanks to the way I'm going to set this up, but that means that I only need a tiny little bit of iron production. So that means that actually these two metal casters are going to be more than enough. Well, they're going to be exactly enough for that 24 iron per minute. That's going to go into a box for now over here. I'm also having a loose storage over here in order to store all of the slag that I will probably still be producing because I have nowhere near enough iron scrap to go around for now. But at least it is here and nice and tidy, stored somewhere. Now we're going to of course need to reutilize that as well, probably still for concrete like I'm doing before, but like I said, I want to make sure that has its own little district where I'm going to do that. Now that means that this covers the iron production. Now the next thing up is going to be steel. Alright, so that means that once I have this set up, and then as you can see, I actually turned this around a little bit because I just realized that if I'm going to alternate working from top to bottom and left to right and stuff like that, I'm going to get into very weird shapes and issues really fast. So I'm going to work top down for every single line of this production. And that means that I just flip this around and now the storage unit is over here. So actually we have the inputs on this side, the outputs on this side now. That will change in a moment, as you will see, but either way, I added in a new production line now for steel. There is enough molten iron over here to have 2 of these oxygen furnaces produce steel, which happens to be exactly the same as we have over here. So actually what we've done now is we have recreated most of this and about 1/3 of this, but we don't need the other part, at least I don't think so right now. And this is slightly different than before because this still has its own designated zone. As you can see, it's in a nice little square over here. It's just slightly extends, but that's not really an issue. Because, well, we have 2 different buildings in here. We have the oxygen furnace and then we have the cooled caster in order to make the actual iron. Now, based on the recipes that I now have easy access to, I can actually tell that the only way we are ever going to make steel is exactly what we're doing right now. We can upgrade that later on. It's the same type of building. So there's no reason to keep this very complicated or anything like that. The only thing we can do with molten steel is actually make iron. So there's no reason not to just combine these 2 units, these 2 buildings, I should say, in a, well, 1-to-1 ratio throughout the entire build. It's the only thing we're going to use those buildings for. So that means we don't need to take into account any other inputs or anything like that we might want to change up with. We do have one issue now, however, because even though I have an output here for the steel, which I probably should mark up, otherwise we're going to have an issue. Same over here actually for the iron. This is all types of things that I keep forgetting. Did I do it for the slag? No, I didn't do it for the slag either, so let's make sure we do that. So all of that is now nicely set up, but we also need oxygen and we need water. And again, these are the only 2 things that we're ever going to need here. So I'm actually going to set up 2 input storage units over here and then have those, make sure that we have oxygen and water delivered to that somehow, but make sure we have that connected up to this, which then looks something like this. So we have the oxygen and the water coming in here. Now I actually had to copy paste this intersection here with the junction and put that next to it, because you can't by default have two junctions next to each other. And again, this is something one of you in the comments pointed out to me, that you can actually do that by copy pasting, but you can't do it when you're actually building. But as you can see, the game is kind of complaining that these things do not connect properly now. That's fine, I don't want them to connect, because one of them is actually transporting oxygen and one of them is transporting water. But I believe it should still work this way. If it doesn't, we can always change the height of the pipelines, but I think it should be working just fine. Now the oxygen is going to need to come from somewhere as well, so that's why I now designated this square over here, the partially covered in a mountain square, in order to start making some other random stuff. For example, the oxygen. So we have an air separator over here that's right next to the one we already had, but this is in the designated area now. This is just going to start producing some oxygen that's going to go into this storage over here. That means that we can actually use this for other stuff as well. But I also had a pipeline connected straight to the storage unit so it can go into the steel production. Yes, that means that this is kind of redundant, but I'm going to be using the oxygen in multiple places, so I want to make sure I have easier access to it than I have now. I also built a ramp on top of that, so I am 100% sure that everything can pass across this fat line, basically. So we have this highway over here, and we have a highway over here, so we can make 100% sure our vehicles will not get stuck. Now, that means that I only have the water remaining. I'm going to hold off from connecting the water just yet, because I'm not entirely sure where all the other water is going to need to go. So I just want to wrap my head around that first. So next thing on the list is doing pretty much the same for copper. Now this is going to be slightly different, but the initial setup is pretty much the same. So what I've actually done is I copied this half of the build so far and just placed it down over here. It has its own nice little square, as you can see, and that leaves a lot of room for expansion. Maybe it leaves too much room for expansion, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But right now I'm just playing it safe, and as you can see, I can make 3 or 4 times the production here if we would want to, and probably somewhere along the way we're going to get upgraded buildings as well. So I'm going to assume that leaves more than enough space for expansion for the foreseeable future. Now, of course, copy pasting this by itself is not going to do the trick, because it has the wrong recipe set, so we can untag those and tag the copper versions of that, and then do the same for the storage units and so on. But that's a pretty easy way to set up a new production facility. Now, what is slightly different with the copper build is that we actually need a lot more copper than we do need iron, and we don't have a steel equivalent. So rather than making 2 different types of things, we're just going to make the impure copper from the molten copper. We need a couple more of these metal casters in order to do so. We also need to make sure we actually transform this into the pure version. Now, we definitely want to do so by making sure we use acid wherever we can, but I actually kind of want to build in a backup just in case for whatever reason something goes wrong with the acid production. We can fall back on the water inputs instead. And that is where the balancer comes in. So I have a pipe balancer over here. It's going to prioritize getting in the acid, but whenever there is no acid, it can still take in water from over here. And of course, both the recipes have been turned on, but have been prioritized in such a way that, again, we're using acid primarily. And if we have anything left, we don't have any acid left, we will start using water instead. Okay, so this covers the copper area. Now, I also want to kind of redo this concrete area as well, and I'm going to relocate that to this square over here, which includes the sand. I'm not going to need a huge amount of production of this, I hope / think. So I'm gonna basically dedicate this half square to that. That should be fine, I believe. And that just means it gets out of the way over here. That's the main reason I want to move this. Now, honestly, I kind of like this layout, but again, I'm going to stick to what I've been doing so far and make a corresponding layout for the concrete production. So the interesting thing is there's actually a ton of different ways in which we can either consume or make the concrete. However, we only have one unlocked so far, so we'll keep it pretty simple, but this is something to keep in mind again, because this is why I'm doing this. I want to be able to use all those different recipes in a very easy way without having to kind of destroy my factory. Well, more than I'm doing right now. This is just a one-time thing, but after that we should be able to easily change the layout of our factory, or the production of our factory, I should say, without changing the layout. Okay, pretty straightforward so far. Now it's worth keeping in mind that cement is always used to make concrete, and it's always going to go into a mixer, although it can be used in different combinations of stuff. I only need to put up a line of mixers in front of it. Okay, so something like this. We have the sand and the slag coming in over here, we have some water coming in over here, and then we can store the actual concrete over here. It's not quite as compact and nice looking as the facility I have over here, but it does get the actual job done. Now there's one problem though. I can't actually use the slag. I need to have the slag that is crushed. So I do need to make sure I can actually crush that somewhere. And I'm actually thinking to designate this tiny little square over here to things like crushing and maybe even recycling later on. But for now, that means that I would have to cut out some of this area because, well, there's not much room in here, but honestly, we don't need that much room to begin with. Okay, so something like this should do the trick. I just a simple storage unit over here with a couple of crushers that leads into another storage unit, and that storage unit once again connects to the storage unit over here with a nice little bridge to make sure that our highway over here keeps being accessible. Now, super organized, honestly. It's kind of spread out, so in that sense it's not super efficient maybe, but that's something my trucks can easily solve, and I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem. We can always connect things up with belts anyway, but what I want to try now is actually see if I build all of this, if I can actually start taking this down, and hopefully not everything will suddenly crash down to pieces. Okay, to start it off with, I'm actually going to build a nice little fluid storage over here so I can actually store some of the water I am producing over here. And that means that my trucks can start driving up and down. Now, I'm going to start with, I think, what is the least vital part of my construction, and that is the concrete facility over here. So hopefully if we wait a moment, our trucks should start bringing in the resources in order to make this. Well, it's quite busy over here, and look at all those trucks driving around. It is putting a heavy drain on my resources. However, that's not going to be a problem because I'm hopefully going to be able to restock some of those resources by actually taking down the facilities that I already have. Okay, so this is mostly up and running. Well, it's up, not running just yet, but I am going to start charging up the iron facility as well. Would you look at that? It's super crazy out here, but it's starting to look like something, and this facility is actually completely done, and I really like the looks of it. I'm not really sure if it's going to be an improvement, but at least visually it is an improvement. It looks very organized, and so does this actually. It's a little weird in terms of how the trucks decide to deliver their stuff. It seems kind of random, honestly, but it's not really going to matter because right now we're doing fairly well on the construction materials, so as long as that is the case, we shouldn't see anything imploding just yet. Alrighty, so that's the steel and the iron production up and running as well, so now we can unpause the copper production and we should be good to go. Alright, and with all those other facilities up and running, I'm now completely deleting my original facilities. Now, that does mean that I just removed all of my assemblers, making all the stuff I actually need to keep my factory alive. So once this is gone, I definitely want to start pausing it because, well, I'm going to need some maintenance and I'm going to need some mechanical parts and electronics for that, which I'm currently no longer producing. Okay, so most of this has been cleared out now, but as you can see, my maintenance is dropping low because my maintenance depot is no longer getting its resources. So I am going to need to make sure that I start producing mechanical parts and electronics ASAP, because otherwise this is going to go completely wrong. Alrighty, and then this setup should fix that. So I'm importing the steel over here, then I'm turning the steel into the mechanical parts. I'm putting those in a box over here in case I have too many, but there's actually a balancer over here that is going to prioritize actually spitting it out to the side over here, and this is going to go straight into these facilities over here that are the maintenance depots. So hopefully that will make sure I don't drop to zero and everything grinds to a halt. Now, of course, I am going to need some electronics for that as well, so this is why we're importing the copper and rubber over here. And again, there's a box over here to collect any excess electronics that we might have, which we are actually going to have because we're producing way more than I need for purely the maintenance. But again, there's a balancer here to make sure that if we are producing electronics, it is first going to be used for maintenance and then for anything else. So let's see if we can get this built and hopefully then indeed conclude that we are still very much alive. I'm cutting it a little bit close here because my maintenance is dropping really low. But as you can see, I am actually already producing some electronics. And there we go, we have the first mechanical parts in production as well. And now hopefully we should see the balancer doing its job. Yep, really like how those lifts look, by the way. And there we go. And we actually got a little bit of a boost from this maintenance depot over here that was still doing something. But as you can see, this now has both the maintenance and the electronics. Yep, there we go. And we are back up and running. So at the very least, we're not going to be suffering from maintenance problems anymore. Okay, so this is nice and all, but now we are just producing maintenance. But we are not actually producing any construction parts 1, 2, or 3 anymore. So that's definitely going to be a problem really quick if we don't get that sorted as well. Okay, so to solve the whole construction parts problem, I set up this little setup over here. We have the concrete slabs along with the wood and the iron coming in over here. Those are going to go into their respective lifts and stuff like that, pretty similar to what I've done before. However, there's a key difference now, thanks to the balancer, that the overflow of the electronic parts is actually being distributed over here to a secondary line into the construction parts 2. And the same thing happens here with the construction parts 1. So I'm making those here in these buildings over here. Then I'm putting them on the belt going upwards, then into this balancer over here. And it is going to prioritize the construction parts 2. So I prioritize making the high level construction parts over the low level ones. But whenever this belt is full, or I have plenty of the higher level ones, I can start making the lower level ones. I might actually flip that around. I'm not entirely sure just yet, and of course I can always do it on the fly whenever I feel that I need a certain type of production part, but at least this will make sure that I'm kind of doubling up on this production one way or another. Most importantly, it also means that I am only making the construction parts if I don't need the electronics for my what's this called? Maintenance. That's the word I was looking for. So basically I make sure my things don't break down before I start making items that I need to make more new stuff. Now this is of course only the 1 and 2, so I am going to have to make a similar setup to get the construction parts 3 going as well. Okay, so how about something like this? I have the construction parts 3 in production over here. This is actually all to ratio, so I am actually making the I'm utilizing the entire production of all the different construction parts, assuming I actually need those. And as you can see, there's a pretty long belt here, but honestly, there's a limit to how many different types of construction parts we're going to get. So I don't think this is necessarily a problem. It is super easy to expand this if I want to. Honestly, I could actually move this belt up here to make that even easier. And yes, that is exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, like this, and that means that if I ever want to expand this production, I can just copy paste and put those buildings in here and make sure that all the belts are associated with that. Can just hook up to the belt I already have. Might need to replace the balancer at that point, but that's not really an issue. But anyway, I was talking about the construction parts 3. So what I've done over here is just have, of course, the construction parts 2 being input from down below, and then we need steel, and the steel is actually coming all the way from over here. So once again, I have a balancer. I am prioritizing making the mechanical parts, because if I'm not making those, I am going to have a problem because my maintenance relies on that. But any spare parts that are not being used for either the mechanical parts or the maintenance or whatever are going to go on this very, very long belt that goes all the way up here and then straight into this facility. Now, all of this is actually a little bit set up very wide, but again, this makes sure that I can very easily expand it if I need to. Okay, there we go. As you can see, I am now making construction parts 1. This is actually filling up pretty quickly, and as you can see, the prioritization is doing its work. I decided to focus on making the lowest parts first, mostly because that is actually the fastest to fill up. So that means that whenever I use some low level materials, that gets replenished first before I start making the higher level ones again. Again, Can always switch this up if needed, but we should see this fill up pretty soon. And yep, now the construction is going to go onwards to the construction parts 2. And as you can see, there's already some electronic parts waiting, so we should see this kick into gear right now as well. Yep, there we go. And again, for exactly the same reasoning, we already have the steel up and running here as well. So apparently the trucks are, for whatever reason, bringing in some steel manually as well, mostly because I guess the steel from this belt has not been used just yet. This should be turned off by default soon, I believe. Not entirely sure. I might have to manually turn it off, but as I understood it, as soon as you connect the belt to it, it should turn itself off anyway. Anyway, I'll have to keep an eye on that, but for now, as you can see, we are now producing all construction materials once again. Now, I'm going to need to add in science in here somewhere as well, and honestly, rather than just making a very long type of, well, kind of like a mole system, I'm actually thinking that we can probably utilize some of this inner space over here, because there's, well, famous last words, but I don't think it's very likely that we're going to be expanding this very far, although I should probably play it safe and leave quite a bit of open area in here just in case. But the way I'm thinking now is actually to utilize this space in such a way that I might be starting to build my signs, for example, somewhere over here, and then I have the output on the side of the block over here, just so we utilize the space a little bit better than if we would just be expanding left to right. Okay, so something like this I think should do the trick. I have the, what is it, lab equipment over here, which is actually feeding off any remaining mechanical parts and electronics again by using balancers. Since I don't actually need the lab 1 equipment anymore, but only need the Mark II, actually soon we'll need the Mark III. But anyway, the Mark II is something we're constructing here right now, and that needs paper as well as steel, so I'm just feeding in the Mark I directly. Then the leftover steel from the construction parts is going to go in here. Now, I've set this to prioritize the construction parts, but if I want to balance it out, just because I don't want to wait for my construction parts storage to be completely filled up, I can always just click this and then it will be split equally. So that works like I understood it. And let's see, I need the paper as well. So that is going to come in from the side over here, from the edge of the square. There's plenty of space here for expansion, so I think this should be fine, even though I'm kind of breaking my own rule there. And yeah, that should take care of the science production. Okay, that is working like intended, and just because I can, I figured I might as well use this square over here to also start producing some of our science, or consuming some of our science. I'm building my new research labs over here, and these things are actually pretty expensive, so this is going to take a moment to actually be constructed. Look at those level 3 research labs. These look pretty awesome if you ask me. So the next thing on the list, the only thing remaining on the list for this episode, is the vehicle parts, because I still need to construct those somewhere as well. And again, I'm inclined to use this space over here to fit those in. Let's see how we can make that look a little bit clean. Alright, so I realized that most of the components that you need for the Mark 1 and 2 vehicle parts are actually the same as you need for the Mark 1 and 2 science. So I decided to just kind of combine those two together. So I'm making the science over here, which is mechanical parts and electronics, and then right next to there I am making the vehicle parts 1, which is also mechanical parts and electronics. We also need to add in some iron, so that is coming in as well. Well, actually it's not. Hold on. Alright, that is that problem fixed. I made another balancer over here, and I'm exporting some iron now all the way over here into this facility that is starting to make the vehicle parts 1. And I just used a splitter for the science and the vehicle parts, because honestly I need a little bit of both. The vehicle parts are probably going to be overproduced anyway, and then at that point automatically everything flows into science. Similarly, over here I have the vehicle parts 2. Now I do need some glass for that. Did I already put up? Yep, I did. A storage unit for that. I kind of forgot where I was at some point. And as you can see, this is just going to go in here, and then the vehicle parts are going to come out here. Is that a lot of belts? Yes. Do I care? Not particularly, because this is very easy to adapt or expand or whatever we need to do. So yeah, it's all working like intended. I also started to change the surfaces a little bit, clean it up. All the mess that was over here is already gone. And that means I also kind of want to start expanding my concrete production. So let me unpause this. It just means I'm going to produce a little bit more. All the concrete production I currently have is actually going into my construction parts 1 production. So this makes sure I have a little bit of overflow that I can start using on making awesome looking roads. Let's make sure all of this is built as well. And that actually replaces the entire facility I had over here. It's kind of spread out now. Oh, no, actually, no. I forgot one more thing. I needed to expand my steel and iron production a little bit as well. And as you can see, this is now super easy to do. I don't have to fiddle around with Delphi. You can just copy the build I already have. The reason I needed a little bit more iron and stuff like that is because I'm also making the vehicle parts now and the signs and stuff like that. All of that is using a little bit of iron and a little bit of steel, so just need to make sure I have a little bit extra production for all of that. But as you can see, super easy to build now, super easy to expand, and that is all working like intended. Now, new problem, my oil just ran out, literally as I was speaking. So I guess that means that's my cue for the next episode, because in that episode, what I want to do is pretty much apply the same type of rearrangement that I did over here, but then do that with all my fluid production over here. I'm actually starting to clean out this area as well, because, well, doing that, make sure I have a little bit more room to work with. I haven't really decided yet on how exactly I'm going to do that, but I guess you will find out in the next episode. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.